But it was very quickly discovered that the water itself did not have much contamination, but the sediment beneath it was affected, and the concentration of radioactive elements in the sediment under the cooling pond was up to 10 to the power of 5 curie, while the concentration of radioactivity in the water was no more than 10 to the power of 8 or 10 to the power of 9 curie per liter. However, it was shortly revealed that the water itself was clean, but the silt had been contaminated. The concentration of radioactive materials in the silt beneath the cooling pond was up to 10 to the power of 5 curie, although radioactivity in the water was only 10 to the power of 8 or 10 to the power of 9 curie per liter. These were the absolute maximum figures. A lot of dams were constructed, dikes that were meant to hold the contaminated debris, foliage, and all that had contaminated the surface of the water and prevent radioactivity from spreading along the Pripyat and the Dnieper rivers. All this work was done by the Soviet Ministry of Water and by the Ukrainian Ministry of Water, done within a remarkably short time. The dams were designed and built immediately, but this was also accompanied by research work. Additionally, cellites were added into the bodies of dams. Cellites shipped from Armenia and Georgia had high absorption capacity. To capture all the microparticles and all the components of radioactive elements that were in the water and to prevent them from spreading further. As of today, we can say that this goal has been achieved. Around the same time, when the government commission was already final, led by Boris Yevdokimovich Urbina, and there were no further substitutions or replacements, around that time, by a government decision, a coordinating council for the Chernobyl issues was created in the Academy of Sciences, led by Anatoly Petrovich Alexandrov, and I was assigned as his first deputy. The composition included heads of the main institutions associated with the work around Chernobyl and also leading experts such as academician Sokolov, academician Mikhailovich, and academician Trefilov, who were associated with particular tasks of ecological or technical nature related to the liquidation of the consequences of the accident. It is worth noting that when the work became organized in this manner, when the effort was distributed across various institutions and supervisors, there was of course much more order and clarity than in the early days, when all the emergency problems were resolved, but not all the work had gone smoothly. The state of contamination on the rooftops of buildings in the third and fourth blocks, for example, was measured numerous times, and each time vastly different figures and outcomes were reported, ranging from astonishingly high to relatively moderate. That is why I, as well as the military specialists, had to go there. By this time, the military specialists had very successfully deployed a research center in the village of Ovruch, allowing a large contingent of military specialists to consciously perform decontamination tasks, measurement tasks, and all other tasks that had been assigned to them. This center was undertaking substantial work on monitoring radiation and radioactive release, wind transmission, and the dynamic circumstances of various places, and it provided a significant contribution to the scientific study and practical plans of all of this work done in Chernobyl. And the solutions to these challenges were not simple. For example, not far from the station was a significantly contaminated forest known as the Red Forest, which had up to several röntgens per hour of radiation at a time. This forest's fate is as follows. Several suggestions were made. First, leave it alone with its radiation relying on nature to recycle it all. That is, the needles, which are the most contaminated, would fall off, after which the needles could be removed and buried, while the tree trunks and branches would stay reasonably clean. The second idea, on the other hand, was to burn down the entire forest, and trials were even conducted on burning parts of the contaminated forest. However, these investigations demonstrated that the byproducts of combustion carry a significant quantity of radioactivity with them. Finally, it was decided to cut down a portion of the forest, move it, bury it, and simply transform the remaining land into a burial site, restricting access to it, which has been done. The radioactive influence of the Red Forest on the city and its surroundings was significantly reduced when the previous mentioned procedures were completed. The so-called Compton effect sparked a heated debate, because when preparations for the launch of the third block began, and the original plan was to launch it after the first and second blocks, the radiation levels inside the third block buildings and its rooms, particularly the engine room, prevented even proper audit work. The first idea was that it was caused by the building's internal pollution. After decontamination, the level of activity in this room decreased, but remained relatively high, reaching tens and sometimes hundreds of milliröntgens per hour in some areas, and up to a röntgen per hour in others. Then it was assumed that the source of such significant activity was the roof of the third block, which had a lot of distributed fuel. And it was this that was blocking the formation of appropriate radiation conditions. Because despite the fact that the third block's almost 600 rooms had been scrubbed and washed, the radiation level in the engine room remained rather high. So we began taking measurements with a specially developed collimator, which revealed that activity on the roof is not the only source influencing radiation conditions in the third block. The Compton effect, the re-radiation and reflection of a portion of the gamma rays flowing out through the ceiling of the fourth block, was the principal source of the high radiation environment in the engine hall of the third block. So many conversations, surveys, and measurements were conducted on this topic, and it was eventually determined that the main source of pollution was contamination on the roof of the third block. This was the primary reason, although of course the Compton effect played a role in the radiation environment. The fourth block radiated somewhere around 10 milliröntgens per hour, and possibly less than 10 milliröntgens per hour. As a result, the decision was made to totally replace the roof of the third block, installing a new one with suitable safety mechanisms, allowing the necessary construction to proceed, and allowing the third block of the Chernobyl nuclear power plant to be launched on time. Around the same time when the fate of the third block was decided, well, because of such conditions, its debut had been postponed from summer, when it was planned, to autumn. The necessity of setting up and starting work on the fifth and sixth blocks was heavily debated. These blocks were in a variety of degrees of preparation. The fifth block was nearly finished and might be launched within a few months of decontamination, while the sixth block was in the early stages. There was a lot of discussion. The public was protesting the continued construction of the fifth and sixth blocks, as well as their entry into service, because they felt it was too much power, 6 gigawatts on a single site, particularly in abnormal radiation conditions. Ukraine's energy demands necessitated the introduction of ever-increasing power capacity. This issue was debated in the government commission and escalated to higher levels, and it was ultimately decided to defer the issue and that no construction work on the fifth and sixth blocks would be done in the next year, 1987, and perhaps not even in 1988. All decontaminators' efforts had to be directed at entirely normalizing the circumstances in the third block, as well as cleaning the construction base. There was a construction base on the property that housed the machinery and supplies required for the construction of the 5th and 6th blocks. This base was extremely contaminated, so in order to conserve the significant amount of expensive equipment held there, a special workshop, a decontamination workshop, was built at the Chernobyl nuclear power plant. And this workshop proceeded to disinfect the most valuable equipment on a regular basis and ship it to various sections of the Soviet Union for practical use. When active work on the decontamination and launch preparation of the 3rd block began, work on the construction of the city of Slavutich began at the same time, and the pace of the construction was increasing all the time, which made sense because after about 4 or 5 months of operating the 1st and 2nd blocks in a shift mode of work, it was clear that it was very difficult work, both psychologically and physically. Even with long rest breaks, the operators had to be at the control panel for 10-12 hours. There was an issue with working in unusual conditions and being separated from family for extended periods of time. All of this caused such problems that it became clear that the shift method was not optimal in this case. It was a compelled measure that had played a significant role at the time it was implemented. It was obvious, however, that making it the primary method of work based on that was impossible. As a result, the speed of construction of Slavutich, the main city of power engineers, was greatly accelerated. Boris Eudokimovich Urbina, for example, made such trips almost every month, as I recall, to monitor how the construction of Slavutich was progressing, how the outfitting was progressing, and how facilities were being assembled. In other words, he had complete control over this issue, as well as all other aspects of the Chernobyl disaster. Somewhere in the middle of 1987, in the summer of 1987, our own Soviet-made robots appeared. Robots created at the Khrushchev Institute of Nuclear Energy, for example. These were reconnaissance robots that we couldn't get in time from anywhere in the world. So we built these recon robots ourselves, capable of advancing to practically any distance in a guided manner under the most difficult geometrical conditions, in wreckage and in high radiation fields, and providing the necessary information. Even today, these robots play an important role because many interesting things about the nature and consequences of the accident have been discovered with their assistance. However, I doubt they will gather any additional information. Another idea that I have repeatedly discussed and requested to be implemented, but has yet to be implemented, is the creation of flying robots, which would be radio-controlled aircraft models equipped with sensors. Sensors for radiation fields, as well as sensors that could measure gas composition at various locations throughout the Chernobyl nuclear power plant. This following statement is dedicated to comrades Novikov Vladimir Mikhailovich, Diomin Vladimir Fyodorovich, and Sukoruchkin Vladimir Konstantinovich. It is about an article that was requested by the magazine Scientific American and must have a philosophical summary. This article's working title is The Causes of the Chernobyl Accident and Its Consequences. The article should be based on my papers, Comrade Diomin's papers, Comrade Novikov's papers, and Comrade Sukoruchkin's papers. But these papers must be compiled and processed in such a way that an integral philosophy emerges. The first section of this article, in my opinion, should be about the history of Soviet nuclear energy development, to remind readers that the world's first nuclear power plant was built in the USSR in Obninsk. Then there was a second station, Beloyarsk, where graphite was used as an inhibitor, and describe its working principle. Then describe the Novovoronezh station, the first block of which has already been built as a nuclear station designed to operate in a continuous mode with a civilian crew, and describe the protection systems used at that station. Then we must mention that both during and after the construction of the Novovoronezh nuclear power plant, our government's policy did not place a high priority on the development of nuclear energy, because it was believed that by using organic sources of fuel, coal from Donbass, gas from the Saratov, and then oil reserves, we would be able to meet all of our internal industrial needs, and that nuclear energy would be unnecessary. Explain that this was a miscalculation in terms of resources. The Donetsk basin's capacity to supply coal was overestimated, as well as a miscalculation in terms of transportation and ecology, because we did not understand at the time the extent of land transport if energy is derived from organic sources, or the extent of pollution including radioactive elements. All of this needs to be described. This is important because of this. It is critical to note that the first cause of the Chernobyl disaster was a 10-year delay in the development of nuclear energy in the Soviet Union. Why? Because it was already clear in the 1960s that developing industry in Europe and supplying it with electricity from organic sources would be prohibitively expensive and practically impossible, and that nuclear energy sources needed to be operational as soon as possible. As a result, there appeared a natural desire to reduce spending on the rapid development of nuclear energy, and it was at this point that the most fundamental philosophical error in our approach to safety was made. Any approach to nuclear safety of a technologically complex and potentially dangerous device must have three elements. First, make the device itself, such as a nuclear reactor, as safe as possible. Second, ensure that the device's operation is as safe and dependable as possible. Second, ensure that the device's operation is as safe and dependable as possible. However, in both cases, the word maximally does not imply complete dependability. Equipment can never work at 100% of the conditions specified by the project, and is impossible to completely eliminate all human error, whether accidental or intentional. This is unthinkable. And because this maximally safe reactor and maximally safe operation are not always 100% safe, the safety philosophy requires mandatory implementation of the third element, the element that assumes an accident will occur and radioactivity and other dangerous materials will leak from the device. And in these cases, enclosing the dangerous device in a mechanism that would localize the accident, which despite its low probability could still occur, is a required element. It would enclose the object in what is known as a containment, which could be underground or other possible engineering option. But the most important aspect for reliability is to have a system that is not dependent on a geographical location. And in the unlikely but possible event of a problem, it will not spread to the surrounding environment, as is the case with mine accidents. This is the third component. This third element was criminally ignored in Soviet nuclear energy, precisely because the pace had to be quite fast, because 10 years had been lost.